Hey everyone, this is Rico Figliolini, host of Prime Lunchtime with City Manager, and we got City Manager Brian Johnson with us. Hey Brian.
Rico, how are you?
Good to have you. It's been a long time since we've been doing this. Feels like a long time.
Last year.
Yes, last year. We didn't even do it in December because it was just a crazy month. Even.
Right.
So I'm glad we're back to it. But before we get to that, let me just introduce again our sponsor, Hargrave Fiber, who's a sponsor of the entire family of podcasts that we do, including the Capitalist Sage, and an advertiser and supporter of Peachtree Corners magazine. They're a great stimulus. They have a great stimulus plan, actually, for new customers to come in. It's a 1-year free business internet and phone service for those companies that come to them. Small, large, doesn't matter. They are a great presence in the community and provides a tremendous amount of support and great customer service. So for those that are interested in the Hargrave Economic Stimulus Plan, go visit hargrave.com/business/economic-stimulus, and you get to the right page. So put that aside now. Thanks, Hargrave, for being with us. Brian, bring you back on here. There's certainly a lot of stuff going on since we met in November, and we're not going to be able to get through all of it. So we're going to be talking a bit about some of the, an annexation happening, possibly. A mixed-use development district that we're going to be talking about, spending some bulk time here on doing that, and a few other minor things. But let's just get the annexation part out of the way, because that was something that's going to be looked at the next meeting again, and it's a 6.5-acre plat at 6770 Buford Highway. It's actually a Brazilian Wood Depot company that sits on that property. And I apologize, I do have a little echo, so if it sounds a little odd on my end, that's probably why. But Brian, tell us a little bit about the Brazilian Wood Depot.
So this is just an example of the very first property that is looking to get annexed into Peachtree Corners since we were created just under 9 years ago. The owners of this company were interested in essentially locking down their, location, and really, as a result of the location, locking down within reason, or I guess removing within reason the uncertainty of what kind of tax and fee burden that they would end up realizing by getting annexed into the city of Peachtree Corners. They don't have the uncertainty of the future of not knowing which city may want to annex them, and even not having necessarily a say in that. So they approached the city and said, look, there are a lot of scenarios in which we could find ourselves annexed into a city we either don't want to go into or are not in a position to have a say, because we don't live in the area that maybe that might be voting on it. And so we'd like to have our say, and we'd like to get annexed into Peachtree Corners. That way we know our, tax burden. And of course there is a tax burden on everybody, county, state, federal income tax, there's a tax burden, but here we are unique in that we don't have a city property tax. So there is a lesser of a tax burden in that particular type of tax. And they just said, you know what, we want to get annexed. And they petitioned the city, went through a process. There's an application process, and it's what's called it's the 100% method, which is one property owner petition that is contiguous to the city limits, petitioning the city. And it goes through a process, planning commission. We have to ensure the county has an opportunity to weigh in. They can't prevent it, but to weigh in on service delivery implications.
Right.
And they put it in front of council because it is an ordinance. It does take, require, council action. And so that's where it is right now.
Wow. And the property owner, I believe, lives in Peachtree Corners too. So it's not like
That is correct. I mean,
Yeah,
those are the kind of things that do help motivate somebody is if they know the people or they know the city and there's less uncertainty. And so they were like, look, we know Peachtree Corners. We like what we've seen over the last, 8.5 years. And we not only live there, but we want our company to be there. And will you consider bringing us into the fold? And that's what council will be voting on.
cool. Good to see that the city can expand a little bit through annexation.
Yeah.
Good. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is actually real quick, because this was actually done, I believe, last month, which is the Redevelopment Authority Board. It was actually appointed. It's a 9-member board. They serve staggered terms, 2 and 4 year terms. There are 2 city council people that are on the board, but non-voting members. And the rest of them are people that are professionals, attorneys, real estate agents, educators, engineers. And essentially, they're there to be able to help create redevelopment opportunities or take advantage of those opportunities and help this and put the city in place where they can help these redevelopers do a better job, maybe bring new jobs, new businesses, reinvigorate an area. So tell us what other advantages or where this is going now that it's set up. Have they had their first meeting yet, or is that happening soon?
All right. So, you hit most of the high points. It's just important to note that, development happens in all different shapes and sizes. The easiest development is oftentimes development of parcels of land that have never been developed. And so, you have a clean slate, if you will, and you get to design your project and then build it. Where it gets more, difficult is when you get into a parcel that's been developed once or an area in which not only are all the parcels essentially developed, but then the area has changed in its character. It's changed in traffic patterns and flows and, all sorts of things. And so that's where we're at right now is we've got a city that, started to get developed like all cities in Metro Atlanta. And it started to get developed in our case, since we're in the northern arc. The southern part of the city got developed first as people migrated out to this area. And as a result, that area of the city is the oldest, versus the northern part of the city. And it is getting ripe.
And I put that map up this way people can see it.
Yeah. And so what you're showing on that map, the purple section, which is the southern quarter of the city, southern quarter to a third of the city, is what we have considered our redevelopment zone, the kind of the area in which we want our redevelopment authority to concentrate their attention, study concentration. And again, most of it just is a product of the fact that was the part of the city that got developed sooner. So it's the oldest. So it's probably in a position to get redeveloped, quicker than other parts of the city. And that part of the city is almost, with, just a few exceptions, also been developed at least one time. So there's almost no undeveloped property left. And so all of that is, what's at stake. And a redevelopment authority has some unique tools at its disposal to help the city redevelop parcels or really, ideally, areas of the city and facilitate that so that we can oftentimes see, some cases, newer product. Other cases, it may be a product that's the same as the first time, but it's not the new part. It's the fact that it's a different use than before because the area has changed, the needs have changed, migratory patterns have changed. And so we want to take advantage of current, situation. And they're going to bring to the table, not only is the board full of a bunch of people who are very smart in this area. I'm excited about the background as to the board members, but they're going to have a bunch of tools they can bring to bear after they study and kind of come together and see if we can't light a spark into some developers and make it, incentivize them and make it worth their while for them to come in and do some pretty exciting things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think people look at a plan that the city puts together, a 5-10 year plan, and think that it shouldn't change, right? It's offices there, it's residential there, but 10, 20, 30 years later, and some of those buildings, 30 years old at least?
Right.
Not older. Though you're right, migratory patterns, the Holcomb Bridge has totally changed over this amount of time of 30 years, 3 decades. Right. So I can see a lot of improvement or changes going on there, and that's being needed, right? More jobs to come in. I mean, they even talked about maybe at some point, maybe a transportation hub in that area as well that would probably make travel into Atlanta a lot faster. Although with COVID now and everyone else working remotely, it almost seems like a long time ago, yesterday, or it's just not even something that's going to happen again.
Well, not to digress real quick, but it's interesting. You just brought something up that's actually creating some renewed challenges for us. Is with COVID and the remote working requirement that was essentially imposed on us, and decisions by companies not to go back to the way things were, even when the pandemic is over, has basically thrown our traffic patterns, completely to the wind. I mean, we're kind of at a point where, we were just talking, my director of public works and engineering and I were just talking about, some of the intersections on Peachtree Parkway. Mm-hmm. And, we did about 2 years ago, a Highway 141 corridor study, and we're looking at, moving money within our capital improvement budget to potentially make or partner with Georgia DOT to make changes to some of those intersections. But we're not sure which ones or how quick or how critical those are now versus the way they were before the pandemic. I mean, you use just one example would be the East Jones Bridge, Peachtree Parkway, Medlock Bridge intersection right there by CVS and everything. I mean, I know you use it quite a bit too. Mm-hmm. Before the pandemic, and as part of the corridor study, that was one of the worst intersections from a dwell time that we had on the corridor.
Right.
But now, not to say that it's perfect, don't get me wrong, but now the problems that we had been facing before it are not the same level, or in some cases aren't even really a problem anymore. And so we're wondering, is this a longer term solution organically because less people are doing it, or is this just temporary because the pandemic is still here? And so you are right. So that's going to affect the redevelopment authority to some degree too, all right, as we look at things, I mean, we're not sure. The world is not going to look, the development world is not going to look the same way when the pandemic even is completely done. We have herd immunity. Everybody's got the vaccine. It's still not going to look the same way it did before this.
Probably a lot of it because before this happened, companies weren't thinking we can have remote workers, right? Because everyone, they wanted their workers close to them. They wanted to be able to see them, make sure they were doing the work, if you will, right? But now they're realizing, number one, they're doing the work. It's cheaper. We don't have to have 20,000 square feet of office. We should actually reduce it to 5,000 maybe, and keep out the infrastructure and everything in the cloud, which is where everyone's moving anyway. This sort of fast-tracked everything, right? So you're right, things are changing. I drove through the Forum this past weekend, right? Number one, there was an accident at that CVS intersection over the weekend. Bad crash. Yep. Hopefully no one got hurt. So people still can't drive regardless of the less traffic, it seems. But I drove through the Forum and I counted how many stores were empty in that place. And there were 13 stores that were closed and papered over. If you're not really looking, you might not realize there were at least 13, if not more, because that was through the main drag of the Forum. So things are changing. People are ordering through Amazon, through Walmart, Best Buy. They're expanding their services online. You're getting maybe curbside pickup, even from Belks. Now, they filed, as we were talking about, Chapter 13 a week ago. So not that anyone knows anything, but when you file Chapter 13, you're consolidating, you're selling off real estate, or you're closing out leases.
You're making changes, the bottom line, right?
Yes. I mean, anything can happen. So that could be, that's might be the 14th store closer, but that's a huge store in that place, right? Although over the past year, it's been kind of quiet. So things have been heading in a certain way. But that brings us to talk about a little bit about that multi-use development district. That's real big. Because when these things happen, all sorts of other things happen, right? People want to change how the development is. People may come back and say, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, quite frankly, if the forum people, there's new owners from over the past few years, right? I think it's Bear Properties.
Yeah, Bear Properties right now.
Right, Bear. So someone can come in, either them or someone buys it and say, we want to put 2 7-story multi-use on this end of the forum. We'll keep the retail that's working on that end. Anything's possible. And how would we address that? How would the city address that? Because they won't be the only ones. There'll be other people, a hotel that may have gone out of business that may want to become reconverted to condos or hotels, or just torn down and rebuilt, right? I mean, anything's possible along those lines. So we were talking about how that multi-use district would work. And I think you also said that, we're along the way where there might be a list of incentives actually at this point. I wish I had a map for that area. So why don't we start out? Why don't you tell us where the area would be of the mixed use? This way people understand what that is.
Well, before we do that, because there may not be, Rico, there may not be a need for us to create an overlay just for a particular area. And we can go through the list here in a second, but I do want to step back and reiterate a point that you just made, and it's important. And that is, prior to COVID, we liked to talk about, and we're very proud of the fact that, we have about 45,000 people that live in Peachtree Corners, and about 45,000 jobs. And we're proud of that because, oftentimes cities either are slanted one way or the other. They're either a major job hub, but there's not as many residents. Atlanta would be the best example of that around here. People think Atlanta because it's the name everybody knows and because it's got all of the urban, area and all, the skyscrapers and everything. But, the city of Atlanta's population is, 750,000 people. Maybe a little, maybe even just over 500,000. Not a lot, but they have a crush of jobs in Metro Atlanta because of that would be one example of regional job hub, and then you've got other examples where it may be the opposite. Johns Creek is a pretty good example of a bedroom community where there's a lot more people that live there than there are jobs. And I'm not saying that one is better or worse. Cities are always striving to be as balanced as we can. But in our case, we were unique in that after Paul Duke created Tech Park and created jobs, then Jim Coward said, I want to build houses so people can live close to where they work. And as both increased, they did it together. So pretty cool situation. But where we find ourselves right now is we have a lot of jobs in some industry that will never, ever be the same. And the industry we can go through is hotels. Hotels are under a massive amount of duress right now. We have a lot of hotels in the city. That's going to change. We have a lot of retail with what you just mentioned, Amazon and others, people doing things remotely. Bricks and mortar is going to go away, or it's going to be significantly different than what we know. That much, at least I can say. 3, we have a lot of restaurants. Those are having a difficult time staying open. And then 4, we have a lot of commercial office space, something in which it's being flipped on its head too, as companies are like, you know what? Our employees can work from home. And even when the public health, restrictions are lifted, there are companies who are like, look, our overhead can be way lower because we're not having to pay rent and doing it. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of the WeWorks and the Regis and other We Partners, that kind of business model.
And they're all looking at the fact that paid time off is nowhere near what it was before. I'm already seeing, for example, someone that I do work for where there's no guaranteed paid time off. We could take off as much time as we want as long as the work gets done. And you know what rabbit hole that could be. I mean, you could be working 7 days a week before you realize, because you're getting texts or Slack messages or whatever, it's going on.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. So, I just gave you some industry that is not good. Then, even a few other ones, the movie theater industry.
Yes.
I mean, of all the times for us to have picked an anchor tenant to be a movie theater, it was these times.
Who would have known?
So we have a lot of uncertainty in the community. Now, combine that to segue into what you just brought up with one other thing, and that is because of the uncertainty around jobs, because of the flexibility that people are being allowed when it comes to virtual work and everything, people don't feel the same need to be living near where their company had headquarters.
Right.
And so now there is a flood of people moving out to the suburbs because they're saying, I may work for a company that our main office is in Midtown Atlanta, but I don't have to commute there every day anymore. So I don't have to worry about, the quality of life that I used to have to consider if I wanted to be in the car for an hour to an hour and a half every morning and then the flip, do it again on the way home every day. If I lived in Peachtree Corners or Johns Creek or Forsyth County and I'm commuting down, now I can move out there and I work from home most of the time, or maybe even all the time coming up, and I can have a better quality of life. Now that's great in most cases, but there is one more unique phenomenon, and that is the people who are doing that, because of the level of uncertainty and the fact that they can be flexible and they may be able to move around or whatever, are not wanting to buy as much as they want to rent. So there is a very significant demand for a rental product, even high-end rental products like you see in Buckhead, but a rental product nonetheless. And so that was a long way of us getting to the point where you just brought up our mixed-use development ordinance, in which we are having it go through a comprehensive change to a degree as a preemptive move to try to manage the pent-up demand for multifamily that is already hit the city. We have a number of applications that are currently on file, like in the pipeline.
Oh, really?
As well as,
now, how would that affect them? Any new rules? Are they grandfathered into the old rules?
they are. If they're in the process, they are, but they may find that they would prefer the new one for a number of reasons, in which case they can request to be put, allowed to sit in the pipeline until the ordinance is adopted and then utilize that one. But we only have two that apply, that could use the old rules. So we don't have a lot, but we do have, I would say, at least 10 different locations in the city that have developers actively communicating with the city in preparation for an application to be submitted to the city for multifamily somewhere. And that's not to mention, just real quick, that's not to mention the forum that you just brought up, rightly so, and that is, depending on how things go, the owners of the forum at some point could turn around and say, we need a mixed use product here.
Right.
And the reason is as you well know, I mean, you've been on a plan, we're on the county's planning commission. Mixed use works, and mixed use is currently popular for a reason. It works. When you have rooftops within very short walking distance from retail and restaurants, it helps those businesses because that convenient walk-in traffic kind of, if you will, is their stable income, and then their ebbs and flows comes from out of. And so we're just, I don't have anything yet, but I just am throwing that out to say that if things continue along the lines of, Belk, and then of course GameStop's been in the news, but that's a small space. But they announced last November they were going to close 2,000 bricks and mortar GameStop stores in the country. Yeah. Maybe ours made the cut. I don't know, but
most gamers download their games anyway, so I'm still wondering why they're still out there.
I would agree. So what we did, and I've got the mixed use ordinance right here in front of me.
Although that property would be a bit of an issue because it's right up against Amberfield. So the setback with that, depending on how tall right now, what is it, 3 stories? I mean, if it stayed 3 stories, it'd be different, but going up to 7.
You are right. I mean, first of all, you already hit the nail on the head where you're talking about a redevelopment, and so that's already harder. And there's a lot of other constraints. You've got the back of Amberfield close to it. You got DOT. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it'll happen. I'm just saying if there's enough vacancy there, the owners are going to say, look, we've got to do something different, and putting residential units into that thing might be what happens if the rest of the country is any indication what happens when you've got these products like this. And that's, again, why mixed use works. It's not too much of any one thing. And that's why they have a mix of uses. It's almost like a micro economy, amongst other things. There's a reason we put townhomes in the town center, is rooftops there.
And also the idea of having a hotel, which probably won't ever happen now, an apartment complex right there, right next to town center made sense.
It's people, and people are the, lubricant of the, local economy there. So anyway, that's you and I took a long time getting to the point where we're talking about this mixed use ordinance, but the mixed use ordinance is our way of maybe preemptively seeing about managing some of the impending applications coming in that are going to be in the mixed use, vein. They're going to come through using that. At least we're pretty sure they will. So we decided to rewrite the mixed use ordinance and essentially do it in a way that maybe if somebody comes in and they have either pretty close to a use by right, meaning they're going to be able to put a mixed use product on there anyway, but they're going to need the city for something else. And oftentimes that's something else. There's always like little things, like maybe they need a setback here or a waiver of this here. But oftentimes, even if somebody has a parcel that's zoned for mixed use and it's a use by right, the city couldn't stop them from putting in multifamily. But oftentimes what they need is the currency what drives residential, and that's density. As you know, density is the currency of, residential development. The more units you can get in, the more money they can make. And even in some cases, the more, the nicer they can make it because they're making more money. And so what we're looking at is using that currency as a way to incentivize it. So we're looking at starting out with a baseline, a pretty modest density, but then creating a menu of things that we think would make the development much better than normally you would see just a conventional rezoning and that's it. And for each of these, have some sort of a density accelerant, a density, or
Sure, point system.
Right. So somebody could go through and say, all right, I want to do these, and when I do this, I'm getting an additional this and that and the other. So, for example, we have a couple of things in here, and the incentive items would be in things like donating property towards the city's multi-use trail system or to open space, or creating public green space, separately metering the multifamily units so that they could be converted to condos, an ownership product, or back and forth.
Right, we talked about that.
Yeah. Yep. Smart technology building enhancements, which I will credit to you, Rico. In fact, this show, last time we talked about it, you said, we got Curiosity Lab, we got Tech Park Atlanta, we've got companies that are here that are in this space. We should, there should be unit, technology enhancements or building technology enhancements that we should, include in this. And I thought that was a great idea, but that's another one. Electric vehicle recharge stations, making it LEED certified or Green Earth or a comparable certification, making the building that one. Underground stormwater detention.
Okay.
Public art features. Let's see, parking corrals for e-scooters, or adaptive reuse of existing building or structure, which we may find is unfortunately something that is brought into play more than we would like. Is somebody's coming in with a building that's been vacant for a long time and they want to repurpose it to something else. Those are the things that we're throwing on there. And those are things that, for instance, say you separately, most of these are up to an additional half unit per acre if you did that. With a total maximum that we're considering that it doesn't matter how many of these you do, you can't go above a certain amount.
Well, what's the density? Would it be like 13 units an acre, 7 units an acre? I mean, if you're doing a 7-story condo or apartment complex, multi-use, or 5-story multi-use, you got to be talking about what, 8, 10 units?
Currently our current zone, mixed-use zoning ordinance, the one we inherited from the county,
right,
which, by the way, allows up to 7 stories,
right,
which we're reducing, but it's 32 units per acre.
32. Okay.
32.
So are we reducing? So you're saying you're going to reduce the height because in the special use district or special use, you could go 7 stories, can't you?
Yeah, currently, yes. We are looking to reduce that down. I believe we wanted to keep it at 5, which there are some examples of that in the city. I don't know that for sure, but anyway, it's currently under, consideration, but we are staying with the 32 base. And then a total maximum right now we're kind of considering is not to exceed 45 units per acre. And that's if somebody went through that list and spent a lot of money, trying to get a half a unit or a quarter unit or whatever per acre.
And I know you want to leave it open so this way it could be more creative of the type of development that will come in, because you don't want to. Government doesn't always know what's best. So you do want to give them guide rails, and you want them to be able to do the things that you're talking about, but are the minimum requirements at least to make sure that, and minimally, apartments that are going to be built within this multi-use are going to, have minimal requirements. Are they LEED certified? Or what's in there that's at minimum? That you guys
list what's in there that's a minimum, that's a requirement.
Correct.
None of what I read off was an absolute requirement, but if they didn't do any of it, then they would be capped at 32 units per acre.
Well, still 32 is still a lot, right?
Well, I mean, it is, but you see a lot of, but remember, that's within the constraints of setback and, ingress, egress, and
So is there nothing new within, I mean, is there nothing new within?
As it relates to a requirement?
Correct.
Not a lot. I mean, the height, probably, I mean, not a lot. But remember, this is still currently being discussed. I mean, council has this, the first read, and they're providing me feedback. So that might be one where they want to take, some of this and kind of make it more requirement. But, remember, the more you make as a requirement, then the more the development community comes in and says, well, if it's a requirement, then my baseline density per acre should be a little bit higher if that's a requirement versus starting lower and saying, hey, you want more density, you got to earn it.
Right.
There's how you.
For sure. There's a give and take on it. I was just wondering if the minimum, bar has been raised a little bit compared to other cities. I mean, we are a smart city. We keep talking about that. Smart city, technology, the stuff that we're doing here. If we want to keep attracting that type, I think the city stepping forward and certainly this list is helpful. This list is great, actually. Not everyone does this. I'm sure maybe Atlanta's doing it now.
Not to this level.
No, I'm sure they're not. I mean, not to this scale.
All right, well, Rico, what you're bringing up is really a good question, but it's a fundamental debate between writing a code that is more heavily on the regulatory component or the incentive component.
Right.
And you can make an argument either way. I mean, what you saying, hey, you should make more things as a requirement. That is a legitimate, effective way to do it. The detractors would usually say, well, that's not encouraging, innovative and remarkable types of things as much because you did that. That's true. But then, of course, the converse of that is if you make it all incentives and not much different baseline, then you might encourage the bare minimum. And while they won't get a lot of units, they don't make it all that unique. And it's kind of a, another multifamily.
Unless, of course, they have to get a rezoning to be able to do what they want to do. Or like you said, setback. Every time a developer comes to a city or a county and they want to do things and they need a setback or a slight adjustment, that's when the door is opened, right? And that's when leadership
it is. That's when once you crack it open, then they can start asking for anything and everything, and you don't really have a nice, line in the sand to. But I will say that I think you will find that the demand here is such. Remember, 32 units per acre comes from Gwinnett County that's been on the Gwinnett County books for decades. And this is the county that has a lot of rural areas still. I always say that to say most of your people out there, these units per acre don't really mean much, like I don't know what,
Right.
But you start getting down into Brookhaven, Buckhead, Midtown, and you're getting into, 70 to 100 units per acre.
Yes.
And we're not wanting to go there, but I'm just saying the fact that we did not raise the floor, despite the fact that there is a demand for more dense, almost like Brookhaven 10 years ago. That's what the demand and the pressure we're under right now. And we're trying to manage it because, again, we can't always stop it. And it'll either go past us or in some cases we don't even have the ability to because somebody has a use by right. But we're trying to manage it. And I do think that keeping the ceiling at 32 and only raising it if you earn it is a pretty, council is inclined to like the incentive model a little bit more than the other one, but more to follow, on that. But anyway, that's where we're at. And I will say in closing that, you look at that list. If you had multifamily that was LEED certified, that had EV charging stations and e-scooter corrals, and it had taken, say, an empty office building and gutted it and made it into a unique space, it individually metered the units so that you could sell them either initially or later on. Maybe there's a direct link to green space or trail. That's a pretty dang good multifamily development if you got it.
I totally agree, and I'm glad that you guys have moved that way, because it is a lot of good things that wasn't being done before, not
Right.
even through Gwinnett County. So, I mean, the city here I don't even know how many other cities within Gwinnett are doing anything similar to this.
Nothing like this. Nowhere in Metro Atlanta they created kind of an incentive table to choose from, and we kind of started with a lower density, and then we said, you want more, up to no more than 45, but if you've got to earn it, like literally and figuratively. That is, every one of those costs money, but it makes the property better.
You know what's really great about this is that it really removes the politicking, if you will, out of it. Someone can't come and get what they want, and then someone else wants to get similar, and then they don't get it for some reason. It's all, as long as it works within the plan, I guess, within if they're behind Amberfield or if they're near residential, as long as those things work fine, I think everyone's being treated equally then.
Well, only you potentially would know this, given that when you're on the planning commission for the county, you always like to have some protection against somebody saying, well, you let such and such happen and you're not letting, and each instance is different, but you are right that this helps. And that was part of my job, is to try to write something to protect the mayor and council from being subjected, each particular case, to a lot of political pressure. And in this case, they can say, whoa, 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 don't come to us and want us to grant you a variance and give you more density, which now basically every case has that happen, because the 32 base density is really not dense enough. And so this, they can say, don't come to us. You have your little roadmap.
Right.
There you go. You know how to get more. You don't even need to get in front of us. Staff will handle that on our own. You go earn it.
You guys did a great job on it. I mean, that's a great list, and I can't wait to see what how it finalizes out and comes. Listen, we've reached I've kept you a long time already on this.
No, it's okay.
But it was a good talk, and I do appreciate you coming out and doing this with us. But I do want to share with people a little bit about what we were doing this past. It was, I forget which night it was, but just before my magazine deadline, we were able to meet up with Brian and his basketball team at Peachtree Corners Baptist Church. Was it the Blue Devils?
It is Blue Devils.
Blue Devils. So that was great. We had George Hunter, that does a lot of our photography now, out there, and so this was the shoot that we set up. And what I want to show everyone is essentially what the shoot turned into once we did the cover and sent it off to the printers. So this is the cover that we ended up printing, the magazine. It's going to be in the mailboxes, I believe, tomorrow, or actually at the post office tomorrow. So it'll be out this week. Everyone should be getting it by this weekend coming. It was a great cover. Guys, it was a good interview. And Peachtree Corners Baptist Church does a great basketball program there. So really happy with that.
And Rico, again, thanks for doing that. I mean, that your publication is really read well. It's written well. It's talked about a lot. People enjoy it. It makes us feel like, what, we are really a community. We have stuff going on. We get to report on it. And so the city appreciates you doing it. As a resident, I appreciate you doing it. You do a great job. You got great writers and obviously photographers.
Yeah.
You're picking your stories right out of the stuff that means something to all of us. So thanks for doing it, because if you didn't do it, there's a lot of stuff out there that none of us would know is going on, and we would be able to talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you guys supporting us. And I do have a really great crew of people, writers and photographers, that help put this together, because without them, I don't know how we would do this. The stories, we'll never run out of stories. There's always great stories, and everyone's always recommending other stories to us, topics and such. So a lot of good stuff.
But isn't that the harbinger of a great community, though? Is the fact there's just so much going on, you never run out of stories. That's just, to me, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, not only do we have, for example, the basketball thing that's a cover story, but we did an article on the hockey rink, the Mark Ogden hockey rink.
Yep.
So there's that. There's a Girl Scouts article that we have in there. There's the article about the redevelopment program, an article about United Peachtree Corners Civic Association, and some background on that. There's a lot of stuff in there. So I'm hoping people find things they're interested that's in that publication. It's online, or will be online. I'll be sending out an email later this week, or in the next day or two, actually. So, but I love doing this with you, Brian. Thank you for sharing all that information with us, and for doing a great job, actually. You've done phenomenal. I have no complaints. Although I hear other people sometimes, you know how it is on those forums. They always have to chat at someone, maybe. But
I was gonna say, if you want to see complaints, just get on Nextdoor, maybe Facebook, and you'll see plenty of them. So,
yes.
or my inbox, I can start forwarding you some of them if you want. I'm glad that your head is in the sand, so you don't hear any of it. It's fine. It's the price of being the government of last resort. So it's
if they ever start storming the gates and take over City Hall, then you might, it's a different story. But all right, great having you on.